when you use it, which we did not always do. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a prudent thing.
Okay.
It will never kick in after the session. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think we're going to kick off. It seems to be. Yeah. All right. Welcome to Chapter 113 of the Ops Area Working Group joint meeting with Ops Area. Hank and I, Joe Clark, will be your hosts. We have Tien Ren joining us from remote. And we have quite a few other people. So welcome out there in Meet Echo Land, everyone who is joining us for the Ops Area Working Group. As a reminder, this is an IETF meeting, and as such, the note well applies. I'm sure you've all seen it and read it, but there we go. My confidence monitor went off. But as a reminder, all of your contributions, everything you say at the mic is public and subject to the IETF processes and policies. As another note, we are a collaborative group of people. We're all working towards a common goal of making the internet better. So as such, we request that you treat each other with respect. And that's that anti-harassment procedure there as well. So this is our first hybrid meeting. I mean, I guess you could say we've always kind of been hybrid. We've always had some remote participants, but this is unique. We are, for the first time since Singapore in 2019, we have some in-person participation. You can either choose to join that with the Meet Echo app. So you can see a QR code if you're here in the room. If you scan that on your phone or mobile device, you'll have the Meet Echo Lite version. If you are presenting with that, you can use it to adjust the slides, but it looks like we have a clicker. Actually, I don't think that clicker will work. So we can also move the slides for you. And if you wish, you can join the Meet Echo Heavy by clicking on the video icon in the data tracker agenda, and you can follow along. For remote participants, this worked just like before. Hopefully you're all signed into Meet Echo, and like I said, I see a number of people there, so it looks like that's all being very successful. What we're going to do is go through our agenda first, and hopefully by this time you've had all the information you need, so you can look at that there. As I mentioned, I'm Joe Clark. We have Hank joining me here in the room, and we have Tien Ren remote. Elliot Lear has, via email, I have a paper trail to prove it, and I see him online, graciously agreed to scribe for us, and I know Rob Wilton has done so in the past very well, I might add, so I cannot underestimate the appreciation I have when it comes time to upload the minutes and make Warren happy. Meeting materials are up to date, so you can go there in Data Tracker and see that. And as always, yes, we're meeting in Meet Echo as well. Where do we stand? We have some great news, actually. We've got 3 new RFCs published since our last meeting in 112. We have the first 2 of the layer of the LN or LXNM models. So we have the common and the L3. You can see if you read down a little that the L2 is in with the ISG and waiting a revised ID. And we had 2160 published on export of MPLS segment routing label type information and IP flow information export. So great work so far. And we've got a lot of drafts progressing. So we have one in the RFC editor queue. That's the network telemetry framework. I have been a bad chair, and I need to close this working group last call on VPN service performance monitoring. We got some good comments on that, and there was a revised, I believe a revised ID just came through. And we have a few close to last call. We'll start that after these proceedings at some point. Some of the MUD, SBOM, and the service attachment points, which we'll hear from today. Henk or Tianren, is there anything you'd like to add to status?
That sounded an excellent summer, I think.
Okay. Moving right along. So you are right here, right now, in our administrivia section, and then we have, I'm not going to read every agenda item. You can see we have, as usual, a quite packed agenda for Opsawg, or Ops Area Working Group, and then we will hand things over to our illustrious ADs, and they will do an open mic, and I know Warren has something to say. Is there any reason to bash this agenda? And I know that there have been some bashing already, and we've shuffled things around to kind of accommodate people, but any other bashing before we kick things off? No. Okay. Then if we could, Med, wherever you were at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Do you want me to share the slides or?
I can load those up for you. You're doing. Sadly, it didn't come in order, but I think I've got you right here. So can you see them?
Okay, thank you, thank you, Joe. So this will be a short update of the service attachment points to report what are I would say the recent changes to made for this in this specification. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just to remind I would say the context to this is the structure we presented last time. So for the service attachment points, things are really simple. We have, I would say, a new structure that we enhanced the service at the node level. We modeled just to have a list of service attachment points that are, I would say, identified with the an identifier, and we bound a list of services to that one. So the document was in the last call. Sorry, in the adoption call for adoption, in which we received, I would say, a lot of useful comments from the working group, and that revealed, I would say, a lot of issues that are listed in the next slide. So basically, there is one, I would say, one important thing that was raised by Benoit is that we, if you want, if you can just please move to the next slide. As we are, I would say, assigning or associating multiple services to the same service attachment points, there is a need to a means to display and to use filters just to specifically have a topology for a given service and not for all of them. With the old version we have with the model, that was really difficult to do. So this was one of the I would say important feedback we received from the working group. There's also another comment from Dhruv, and this one is also important, is how to associate between the service attachment topology and the physical one. So we need to have a glue somewhere in the model to let us, I would say, easily graft the service attachment point topology into the physical one. There are also various issues that was really, I would say, raised during the call for adoption. For example, if you want to cover not only the user to the network interface, but also for the services that are, I would say, requested from a peer network. And for that one, we need to have, I would say, some discussion about the network interface. There are also a lack of examples to illustrate how the model can be put into practice. So in order to address all of these issues, we have updated and proceeded with many revisions of the specification that can be shown in the next slide. So rather than indexing the service attachment points by its AD, we are now having something which is structured based on the service itself. And under that the service, we have added multiple leaves and parameters there in order to address all of the issues that were, I would say, listed in the previous slide. We also added a lot of examples as appendixes to really illustrate how the model can be used in various contexts. We used VPN here for that purpose, because the working group is working on, I would say, in IL2 and IL3 services, but the same exercise can be done for other services. We used also to have one comment from Joe about the mapping. And for that also, we have added multiple example at text to explain how we can manipulate the model in order to use the mapping between the service and the service attachment topology. Next one, please. We also received the Yang Docker reviews. There's nothing I would say major there. There's only comments about some nits about renaming some leaves and so on, and it was really straightforward, but still a good review from Martin. Other for that, we don't have any other pending issue on this document, that we think that we are ready for the working on plus call. I know that Benoit is currently reviewing the I would say the draft to check the mapping I mentioned earlier, but this can be handled as part of the working on plus call if the working group decides so.
All right, any comments or questions on service attachment points? I did note, I appreciate the revision, and I noticed Benoit I didn't get to read it yet just before I came here. And like I mentioned, Med will, looks like Scott's joining the queue. And you're here. Scott, go ahead. Scott?
Hello, there we go.
There you go.
I was triply muted. Apologize. So, so can you go back to the tree? I just have a simple question. I hope it's simple. Right there, this tree. So, what I'm seeing here is that you have a node, and then you have a service with a service type, but service type is a key, an identity. So, is that really a type, or is that a pointer to an instance of a service? Because the way I'm looking at this, you could only have one service. You could only have one service of a service type for a node. Couldn't there be multiple services that are the same running over a node? Just looking for some clarification there. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Actually, you can have multiple services under the same node, and the multiplexing will be done by the attachment interface itself, in which for example, you can have multiple sub interfaces that can be associated with the same service, and you can use that as the multiplexer if you need that.
Other comments? I see Rob approaching the mic.
Rob Watson, Cisco, as a contributor. In that scenario, though, wouldn't you end up binding the sub-interface as the service interface, the attachment circuit interface? Or does the SAT always define the physical interface?
The SAP does not always require a sub interface to be present, but it. But I'm not sure to see the case you are referring to. If you can just, I would say, clarify further, that would be great. Rob.
If you had multiple pseudowires, point-to-point pseudowires or VPS services, then they would all be terminating to the same PE device, and each of those would have a separate sub-interface on a given PE interface to each of those different services. So I just wanted to check that could be modeled here, basically on the back of Scott's comment.
Yeah, I need to check this one for the to-the-wire specific case. I can do that offline to really check it if it works on that case as well.
Okay, thank you.
Dhruv, I see you in the queue. I think this will be our last question.
Thanks. Dhruv here. One question, Med. In the document, we say that this model can be seen as an inventory model. And I have a little query on that, because I also noticed that in CCamp, there is a document and they are also asking for feedback on where to do the network inventory model. And my first question is can really this model be seen as an inventory model? I wanted to get a feedback from the room as well, or are we misclassifying this? And also to notify the working group, what do they feel about work that is being done in CCAMP on the IETF network inventory? Is that something that we need to also be looking at in this area?
Yeah, that's a good question for me. It's still an inventory model, but yeah, it's up to the working group to I would say to check the other work and to see if there is something to be said there.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ned. Rob, I think I can remove you from the queue. Okay. Next up, Bo.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Bo. I'm going to present this young model for network and VPN service performance monitoring draft on behalf of all the authors. Next, please. The first thing I like the working group to be noticed that is that this draft has just closed on the working group last call. And during this last working group last call, we received several helpful comments from members. So we thank Adrian, Fang, Joe for their helpful comments. And these in all these comments, we have a major one. There is a comment. There is a suggestion that inter-site VPN performance monitoring type can be added to the model because right now, like before this, in this 03 version, we have only tunnel-based VPN performance monitor type. So I will talk in the next slide. And we also in the GitHub tracked all the issues that we and we also address all those issues. So thank you. Next, please. And here is the comment that I just mentioned. I put a figure here that to show what the comment is about. Like before, like this, there's 3 version. We have only the tunnel. I put in a blue color that in the overlay VPN topology, there virtual link between this virtual node that represent 2 PE there, and but we don't have that. We don't have an exact OEM method to measure the virtual link OEM. So we use the tunnel performance monitor metric to represent that virtual link OEM statistics. So the comment is about that it also should be allowed that like VPN access interface because there are already some common practice there that use like TWAMP and other OEM method can be used to measure that per VPN performance monitoring. So so in the first revision 4, we add a new node. We call it VPN performance type. And we also use the choice definition. So the reason why we choose type choice is that we think the inter-VPN access interface performance monitor can cover the the tunnel part uh, measurement. So we think uh, so this method, two methods, on either of them can be used to represent VPN performance monitoring, that abstract link performance monitoring. So that's the reason we choose choice. So we like to hear if there are other comments on this. So this is a major one left for the working group discussion. And that, next please. So since we think we have addressed all the issues, so the next step is the authors request IESG publication. So that's all. Are there any comments on that?
Comments? Bo, on the on this choice,
Yes.
do you think you have enough? So last call is like I mentioned, wound down. Do you have enough input here? Is there others in particular that you would like to get insight or thoughts on before handing this up to the IESG?
Right now, we have published revision 4 to like already add this choice. So I don't know if that make our working group last call like there are is need another last call. You mean?
Um, yeah, I don't know. Listening to you talk, it sounded like there might need to be some other eyes on this. It seems like a substantive change that just snuck in once the window opened. It might benefit from another week or so once things settle down. I'd like to understand how what you feel you feel comfortable with given what you've just stated here.
Oh, I'm fine with you. I mean, we definitely we discussed this is to like we hope that working group can have more review on this because in that way that will be more the text and also the model will be refined. So
Okay.
I think from my view I'm fine with. So if Matt and other authors don't have other like they don't have other opinions, I'm fine with this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? Got a few minutes. No? Okay. Thank you, Bo.
Thank you.
Benoit.
All right, so I'm going to present the sane work. I'm trying to buy you some minutes.
Thank
I'm
you.
starting to talk right now.
Well, it would have helped to put it in order. Never mind. There you go.
We did. All right. So, okay, we produced new versions of this work. I'm going to be quick here and again buy you some minutes. So on the next slides, I've got one intro on what this work is about. I presented multiple times. I don't plan to go through it. If it's new to you, quickly review the slides. Now, on the next slide, Joe, we added in the version 2 of the draft, we added information about circular dependencies. There were discussion with Elliot Lear and Rob, so we added that. In this latest version, we added a specific example of how to prevent circular dependencies. Okay. In the next slide, please. What we've been adding also, and that came from our prototype, is that whenever we have like the health score for a subservice, sometimes we don't have it yet because we're busy calculating. In the prototype, we were reporting 0 as a health, and somehow it was a mistake. It was just missing, right? So it was sending the wrong information, the service was not up and running. So we could be waiting until it's stable, but what we choose to do is to do the proper way in Yang by having a union. It's either missing or it's calculated. And it's calculated, it gives you the health score. So that's an improvement. Okay, and the next slide, please. I want to stress that we've got some implementation of that. The DX agent by the Liège University has been presented already at the IETF a couple of IETFs ago. We have this picture from a prototype that was done at Cisco that was coming from the presentation in the IETF also. And we've got the Huawei prototype as well. On the next slide, the status is that I want to thank the people who provided feedback. There is no more issue except that there is a discussion on the list with Joe, and we need to update the Yang module one more time with the counter 64 on the version. And after that, I believe that we are close to being done. And from the other point of view, we're close to a blast call.
As a contributor, I responded to Jean today. Yes, okay, the version, I'm not in love with it, but whatever. The example, the like implementation suggestion, I think would also be a useful addition, just for others who might want to understand how best to implement some of the health and weighting.
So we're going to post a new version very quick. Yes. And after that, it's up to you guys.
Comments on same? See anyone coming up, so thank you, Benoit. Is that it? Wow, cranking right along. Thomas.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Joe.
There is
So I'm Thomas Graf.
there is a little echo, Thomas, so if you can turn down your speaker.
Sure, yeah, just one sec. So now is it better?
Is it better? Yes, it's better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Thomas from Swisscom. So this is about export of segment routing IPv6 information in IPFix. Next slide, please. So just to give some background, so segment routing can be leveraged in the MPLS data plane and also in the IPv6 data plane. So we have with RFC 9160 the extensions needed for adapting it on MPLS segment routing. Just in a nutshell to describe, basically the IPFix entity 70 describes the MPLS top label stack section, which basically describes the label, the experimental bit and the bottom of the stack bit, while basically the rest of the MPLS label stack is decomposed in IPFix entity 71 to 79 separately. The IPFix entity 47 basically exposes the MPLS top label IPv4 address, while IPFix entity 46 basically from which routing protocol that prefix and label has been coming from. And since this was the only change between MPLS and MPLS segment routing, so basically there were new routing protocols such as OSPF, ISIS, and also BGP and PC being introduced, we're updating the IPFix MPLS top label type registry. Next slide, please. So in order to bring data plane visibility in SRv6, basically in a nutshell, we are so currently SRv6 is already deployed in service provider networks. We have the first few cases which are actually providers are migrating from MPLS towards SRv6. And we believe as authors, it's that currently data plane visibility is missing, especially in such migration scenarios. It's very beneficial that we can see actually how much traffic is being forwarded or dropped towards a SIT. In order to gain visibility into SRv6, basically the segment routing header needs to be exposed. The segment routing header is described in section 2 of RFC 8754. Next slide, please. And when being decomposed in IPFix, we have the IPv6 SRH segments left, basically describing at which point we are in the segment list, while the IPv6 SRH tag and SRH flags, basically exposing the tags and the flags from the SRH header, and the IPv6 SRH segment type basically describes which routing protocol the SIT is coming from. Next slide, please. The IPv6 SRH section is basically exposing the entire SRH in a series of N octets, while the IPv6 SRH segment list section is actually doing the same thing, but only for the segment list itself. We have also IPv6 SRH segment and segment basic list, which is basically exposing the SRH SIT list as an ordered basic list. Next slide, please. So there is two ways how we are able to expose the SIT list, either as a basic list, as an ordered basic list, or as an entire list section. We had some feedback from the mailing list, so depending on implementation, one could be more easily implemented as the others, and the difference is basically where the decomposition is done, either on the exporter or on the data collection side. Next slide, please. There is some operational considerations regarding the compressed SIT container. So currently at the Spring working group, the SRH compression is being discussed. So in context of IPFix, basically it has no direct impact because the CSIT container is still 128-bit long IPv6 address, but it contains basically multiple SITs in a CSIT container, and they are mutually exclusive. It probably makes sense that we are adding in the draft document an operational consideration section to describe what needs to be done on the IPFix data collection side to distinguish between an IPv6 SIT and a CSIT container. From what we as authors understood, it most likely doesn't bring much added value if we are actually decomposing the CSIT container in the compressed SIT, but here I request feedback from the mailing list. Next slide, please. So the current draft status, we already received feedback from Spring, Opsawg, and the IPFix Doctor. From the feedback, we introduced the IPv6 SRH section and the SRH segment list section. And we added the IPv6 SRH segments left so that we can express at which position of the segment list the forwarding is happening, and that's useful for detecting forwarding loops. We updated the operational consideration section to describe the difference between the IPv6 SRH section and the SRH segment list section, in which case, which one makes more sense. And we updated the IANA consideration section to be in line with RFC 8126. The document doesn't introduce any new protocols. It's for documentation purposes. However, because new IPFix registry have been introduced, we specify the document as internet standard to be in line with other documents. Next slide, please. Next step. We are do you recognize the problem statement that data plane visibility is missing in SRv6? We as authors believe that this document should progress quickly through IETF to avoid that private enterprise scope points are being used for SRv6 deployments, and therefore we would like to call for adoption at Opsawg. That's all from my side. Any questions, comments?
Elliot.
Hi, Thomas. Hi, Thomas. Just a quick question. Know people who are implementing.
There is a lot of echo in the room. I don't know if someone's speaker is turned way up. If you want to try again, Elliot.
Yeah.
My question was just, do you know people who are implementing?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. I asked, do you know of any implementations yet?
Not yet. We are aiming for having an implementation in VPP by IETF 115. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Marisol.
Hello, thank you, Chairs, for having the luxury to present here in IETF. First time presenting live. Previous time we were presenting DMLMO, Data Model Lifecycle Management and Operations. The version 2, we are running actually version 4, which is uploaded already on the data tracker. The authors, we have been adding Diego Lopez, who is also here on the list of authors. And we can go to the next slide. I want to give an introduction on where we left it in the previous version. We had been defining several data sets where they were looking more into the assets. Assets, if you remember the definition, and if you have been tracking on the DMLMO, asset is referring to any hardware, software, or virtual entity that we could represent part of the infrastructure running. And we have not been adding any new attributes as part of this new version. It is more on the flexibility and the scalability that we have been adding to the different YAM data modules that we have been working on. If we go to the next slide, Joe, please. If you can see and compare with the previous version, everything that is in yellow is new. We have been adding on this flexibility and consistency on the structure, where we have been defining instances, and every one of the modules that we were defining in previous version is called an instance now, where they are called based on the IETF LMO module. We have defined those YAM modules based on the LMO, and the assets, features, incident, and licenses are part of it. We have been adding organization and LMO users as well. They were attributes as part of the licenses module. And with this flexibility that we are adding, it could be as well something taken by the vendors as a specific implementation on top of the attributes that we are defining and data sets. The flexibility that we are talking to is adding a consistency, how the structure has been implemented on the YAM modules. And we are playing with the augment of the YAM modules in order to build more attributes on what we have defined already. Okay. If we go to the next slide.
Marisol, can you also just make sure that we got people from remote? Says
Okay.
that your audio is cutting out. So
It's
just keep
going.
your mic down.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Perfect. In the way we reference one module, one YAM module to another, we have been including the on this structure how we call and how we reference. In previous version, we were defining assets and sub-assets as part of a container. Same thing for licenses and sub-licenses, features and sub-features. Here on this structure, we are adding and complementing on how we address different reference from one to many. In this case, assets to features. We can have many features in there. Users to organization, we have the one-on-one relationship, and this can be very flexible on how it is referenced with the new YAM modules. If we go to the next slide. Another example of what the extension we have done with the flexibility and consistency, it is how we call this combo structure, where we can reference a previous instance, in this case licenses, we can represent in a better way that it was done before on the on this example that you have here on the licensing. On the next slide, Joe. For organizations, here's an example, but it applies to the other data sets as well. We have this hierarchy represented with a parent and child structure. And an organization, you can see clearly an example of how to use it. And we can call organizations within organizations as part of this hierarchy structure, and even a department on it. This is an example of implementation based on XML. It is not really important on the content for it, but you can see an asset represented with different attributes. Features are part of that asset, and licensing can be referenced as well within that asset. Our asks and next steps. We welcome and appreciate feedback. We have been setting up these side meetings where we have collaboration from Huawei, from Benoit, from Telefonica, as well from Luis, and we are open to get more feedback on it. We have this meeting set up every 2 weeks. We will be extending it to be every month, just to make sure that the good work is addressed on the side meetings. And as part of the next steps, we understand, and this has been discussed, and we can ask the alias, the working group here. We have been discussing that licenses is a complex issue, and we understand it's a complex issue. We are working to evaluate how to tackle licensing, and we are working, Camilo, specifically together with Suita, are addressing this licensing concept. We are addressing as well And for the next revision, we have to really work on that, how to iterate through the young modules, going to more specifics on how we define the type of attributes, going to the enums against identities, and also some of the attributes that are tackled as mandatory, and there are some specifics on how we define addresses as well as part of the assets. But those are specifics that we can discuss further as well. Now we are open to questions and welcome your feedback on what has been done.
Comments, questions?
Rob is up next.
Hi, Rob Wilton, as a contributor or participant. So I spoke to you earlier about this, and I just wanted to share some of the comments I've made to you here. I think this is a very interesting problem to be approaching, and I think it has a lot of potential value. The tricky things to solve is making sure it has both enough flexibility to be widely applicable to different vendors and things, and at the same time having enough commonality that you can then correlate that data together and make use of it. It's not sort of too different. So I think it's trying to solve those two problems together, which is quite tricky, but would be useful that it can be solved. Now, as to some practical suggestions for this, for example, I think that the Open Config Platforms module is sort of trying to solve a similar problem in a very specific case. It's not exactly the same, and the way that they've built their flexibility is to allow this sort of arbitrary parent-child hierarchy to be set up and then flattened into a list. And you have similar sort of things with the sort of parent pointer, maybe children pointers. So I think that's a good thing. And then they're using identities to identify particular properties or sub-properties and extending it that way. So I think identities is probably a better choice mostly than enumerations because it allows more flexibility. I also think that trying to concentrate on the core subset of the functionality that is widely applicable would be a good starting point, and then to try and build extra functionality on as augmentation Yang models or separate draft might be a good way of trying to get a good common core that people can work on.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think we, as you mentioned before, we were discussing on this. It will be good to get the review on those specifics as well, answering on the list, just to make sure that we have a good review. But agree with all the comments. We could even reduce the modules, just making sure that it's common to more vendors, right? And this is kind of the exercise that we want to do on the iteration going forward and moving to call for adoption as well as soon as possible. But yeah, thank you for the comments.
Bo?
Can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I have a clarification question on this. So this model is a device model, or it's like like northbound interface model of like network controller?
So I didn't get the question.
Her question was, is this a device level model or a northbound interface model like on a controller?
Yeah, we consider an asset to be as well a controller. Then it depends from where you look at it, at the asset level. Right? An asset,
Okay.
it is a representation of, it could be a device, physical or virtual, or it could be even a controller, right? From a software point of view, or even a service as well.
So this is not device model from your
It's not a specific
explanation.
device model, no. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Benoit, one last comment.
So Benoit Clay. So I want to address 2 points. So first of all, the inventory, because we've seen that it was discussed multiple times. We even learned today that there's a C camp inventory model. So there are multiple definitions of inventory. There is like the inventory, like the entity map in the past, and we've got a Yang model for that. There is like the inventory for what is in the end platform or device. So to make the link with what Bo was mentioning, there is like device, but whether you see this on top of a controller, they still need to have the same characteristic of the device. It's like an ID, it's like a vendor, it's like an OS, it's like a type and all this. And we start to have this in many different places. So that would be good to have the same consistency. Okay, maybe I'm dreaming of a grouping where we've got the same thing in Yang, right? But that's something we have to pay attention to not redefine the same thing over and over. That's one point. And the second one is about licensing. So you mentioned that I was attending the calls. Yes, and my main feedback was that licensing is very complex. I understand what we want to do. That makes a lot of sense for multiple use cases, but all this has to be cross vendor, right? That's why we are here to do standard, and that will be very complex. So my feedback in those calls were that maybe this is too complex.
Right. And we have also addressed on that question or comment, it is complex. We want to see how far we could get on the use cases that we are iterating, and we are working on that. Camilo and Suita are the main people looking at that at the moment, and we will be following up on the site meetings from that. On the inventory, we have been also discussed previously to this meeting on how to address that. I could say that it's not a use case specifically from this DMLMO having inventory, but we have to define somehow those entities that we are addressing, what we call assets. And there are some attributes already defined. If the working group decide to go to an inventory approach, we will be helping and supporting on that idea as well.
Thanks, Marcel. I ran a poll while you were talking. Of the participants, 20 decided to either raise or not raise their hand. There were 14 in support of the work. And I was curious, as chair, you're not asking for adoption, but there does seem to be a lot of people working on this. So I think we do have to address some of the questions that have been raised and see how we want to proceed. But in interest of time, I think we should probably have this conversation on the list and move forward. But I appreciate you coming and presenting. Next up, we have Ken, who I saw you're online.
Yes, thank you. And this is already an adopted work item. I asked to go a little bit later because I had a conflicting meeting earlier. So yeah, just an overview. So we are looking to update the TLS transport model of SNMP v3. So next slide. So the effort was approved after IETF 112. We've updated the fingerprint algorithm. The big challenge there is that the existing algorithm references TLS 1.2 hashing table. That hashing table will no longer be maintained now that they've migrated to 1.3. And that's a hash of the X.509 cert. We've received comments. We've addressed all of those comments. We posted a new draft. So I think we've resolved everything now. And if you go on the next slide, the big change is that we figured out how to handle this hashing table. Initially, we thought about the concept of replacing the fingerprint algorithm. That results in changing all of the MIB objects and uses a new identifier table. That's a major overhaul to the MIB, so we wanted to avoid that. The second option was to maintain using the 1.2 hashing algorithm table. We talked to the people that are in charge of that table. They did not want to continue maintenance of that table because that would imply any new hashing algorithm could be used with TLS 1.2. So they wanted to avoid that. The good news is that we determined that we could actually just revise the definition of our fingerprint algorithm to use a duplicated table, if you will. So take the TLS 1.2 table as it exists today, that is not going to change, copy that to a new table, revise the definition of our fingerprint algorithm to point to this new table, and now we can extend that table as we need to. The only question has been whether or not this would constitute a normative change to.
Ken, we lost you. Hope if you can still hear us.
It seemed to have timed out for some reason and
You're back.
put me on mute. Okay, so but we determined by consulting with MIB experts that we would be able to make this change without having to go back and revise all of our table structure within the MIB. So this is a fairly easy fix, and that is what the most recent draft reflects. Next slide. There were some other items that we've updated compared to the current RFC. We've clarified that authentication and privacy are always provided. That's just a natural part of TLS 1.3. We remind your readers of the updates in 8996, which prohibits TLS versions prior to 1.2. We are prohibiting the use of the zero RTT feature of 1.3. Clarifying TLS compliance requirements and updating. We made some minor edits to capitalize some keywords to be conformant with BCP 14. We also changed a couple of instances of may not with must not to be a little bit clearer. And next slide. So there are some edits that I've discovered since the last draft that will be in an upcoming draft shortly. The first item is really, given that this is just a simple update at this point, we should probably revise the name of the RFC or of the work to be updates to the TLS-TM rather than specifically citing version 1.3 of TLS. We should remove the double quotes that are within the description clause of SNMP TLS fingerprint, and just some other nits, removing references that are not used in this document, removing the appendix examples because they're just identical to the existing RFC. And the final change, or a question I have, I think, is whether we should change the name of the proposed table. So as I mentioned, we are duplicating the existing TLS hash algorithm table to create our own. That is currently called SNMP TLS fingerprint algorithm table. My thought is this might be a useful registry for other efforts within IETF. So perhaps we should have a more general name, such as IANA multi-version TLS hash algorithm registry. Just a thought. Next slide. So that's pretty much where we are. I think with those final edits, we should be pretty close. We will send it out for a final review and comment, and then we can start the last call process, I think. And we will also make sure we distribute this to the TLS reflectors as well, since it can impact them.
Comments?
Any questions?
Okay, I'm gonna draw a line in the sand. Oh, sorry, Hank, you just beat me to it. Okay.
Sorry, without head. So sorry, no head, no chair head on. So I guess that also in COSI, they're working on a hashing algorithm index. It's probably worth a look at IANA. They want to do that. So if there's overlap, just sync. Just make sure that the indices are equivalent. I think that's the most important thing. I think the TLS might have a different subset than the thing COSI wants to do, but again, there are indices in there today. So if 3 would mean the same 3, the confusion would be way less. So I think that would be interesting to sync. That's just from my side.
I was going to say something maybe similar. as a contributor, I feel my gut, my initial reaction was it might want to stay SNMP as the name of the registry just because of what we ran into with TLS, where if it does cause some sort of semantic change down the road, if others want to add things to it that that this wouldn't support. But Hank brings up a good point. If there are overlap that aligns, maybe then that can help inform your decision, Ken.
Okay. I think we would want to avoid any changes to the existing TLS 1.2 table, any reassignment of those numbers on the simple basis that if we did, it would break backwards compatibility. But if there are additional items that aren't in that table yet, we can certainly add those.
Yep, absolutely. Don't want to change. And Rob is in the queue.
Just to sort of, I've not read this latest version of the draft, so my one question is, and you may already cover this, is if new items were added into the existing TLS 1.2 IANA registry, what process would be involved to make sure they also updated into this new registry? Is that something that draft should have some text to update how that IANA registry is processed to make sure they're copied here, and that doesn't have to be done as like a separate manual step? Does my question make sense?
I think so. I think it's just how do we add a new registered item? I would assume that IANA has formal processes for that. I'm not sure that we need anything in our text, but I'm happy to suggest, happy to hear your comments.
So I think my question is more about, and again, I'm misunderstanding it, but is this registry is meant to be a superset of the TLS 1.2 and 1.3? Is that correct?
Yes. So I think I kind of shepherded some of these questions to the TLS alias. My understanding is they do not want to add any additional entries to this because TLS 1.2, which is all that the original registry covers, is not going to add any more protocol and absolutely any more algorithms. So adding 1.3 algorithms to here with a 1 byte registry value would imply that they work with TLS 1.2 and they don't. My understanding is that there will not be any more additions to this registry, and that is why they recommended we fork our own.
Okay, so I'll phrase my question slightly different ways. If this is an SNMP specific registry, then it'll pick up some default values to start off with. How does it need to make sure that if there's new entries added into TLS 1.3, they also get updated into this SNMP registry? And if so, we want to make sure there's text to make sure that happens automatically and not having to be a manual step. That's the thing I'm trying to get to.
No, that's a good point.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, Elliot, quick comment.
Yes. Just a question. What is the registry policy for the TLS 1.2 for the TLS 1.2 registry in question?
It's an expert review. There's an alias.
Okay, so what they're saying is, are they shutting down? So somebody should take an action if they think that this is going to be a problem. Like they should take a standards action to shut down new entries. Otherwise, it's up to the experts, right? And the experts are meant to be guided by, whatever their best knowledge is. So it doesn't sound like you can absolutely affirmatively say that there will be no new entries.
That's a fair point. Again, I was going off what those experts replied to us with, but that is a fair point. And in that case, the text would probably need to cover the addition to either the TLS 1.2 or 1.3 in registries. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Benoit.
All right, so I want to present a draft which is about data manifest for streaming telemetry. We changed the title, we improved it. Thanks, Matt, for that. This is actually data manifest for contextualized streaming data. And we posted version 2 this week with a couple of updates. So let me go to the next slides. I want to make sure that you understand why we need this. So the idea is not to expose new Yang objects, but rather to define what we need to keep as metadata, what we call a data manifest, as context information, to make sure the data could still be interpreted if the device is not accessible any longer, or if the device has been updated, or has new configuration. The end goal is that from, let's say, a data collection point of view or big data lake, we want to make sure that we could do the anomaly detection and the enclosed loop. So on one side, we have the pronote capabilities, which mean that I could tell if a specific Yang object support the on-change or not. So I could configure it. But what we don't have is that I don't know how it was actually metered, right? And under which circumstances, specifically whenever the device is not there any longer. So on the next slide, let's take an example. We see this from a data collection vantage point. On the left, we've got time 1 with a counter, which is value is 42. It's always 42, right? And the status is up. Now I'm in time, which is now, and there are no updates. And I see this from a pure data collection point of view. So what's happening? Well, there is a problem because my telemetry has an issue, or there is a bug, or the sender, the router, is overloaded, so can't send anything. Or there is no problem because there is just a long cadence in my telemetry. Or there's no problem because it's unchanged, it has not changed. Or maybe there's this feature in my company which is suppressed redundancy, which means if they haven't changed, don't send it to me. And I've got no way to know this from a pure data collection point of view, right? So I might be drawing the wrong conclusion in terms of anomaly and taking an action. This is the entire point here. So on the next slide, we want to propose data manifest. So basically context information. And there are two of them. The first one is the platform manifest, right? Characterizes the platform producing the data. And you see, it could be perceived as inventory. This was the comment I was making before. The source router, the source device. And the other one is like the data collection manifest. Characterizes how and when the telemetry was metered. Okay. The principles here is that whenever you stream telemetry, this context information must follow the data, right? And if the data are moved to a different place, they still must follow the data, because without the context, we have data and we can't take much information about it, much actions about it, sorry. Next slide. So that's the typical Pyang tree. And we've been adding at the top like the vendor. And by the way, we added Nacio from the Madrid University as an author. This was his feedback. And this is aligned with the, again, the platform information coming from the Yang catalog, because we always deal with the same type of tuples, right? We also included the full Yang library to get information about the data store. We corrected a small mistake that this Yang module was read-write. No, it's not. It's only read-only. Along with data, you've got this contact information. You're not supposed to change it. It's from the source, right? And the package set. So on the next slide, this is information about the data collection manifest, right? We're telling like, well, per subscription ID, well, what is the requested period, the actual period, the on-chain yes or no, suppressed redundancy. And we added also from where the store comes. There are some potential interesting use cases there, comparing what is intended or candidates. On the next slide, we could ask ourselves, how frequently do we update those two manifests? The platform one, it's only whenever we get a platform change, typically a reboot, a change of OS. Okay, so not very frequently. Now for the data collection one, we update it whenever the collection condition changed. Typically, I change the cadence, or I got a new subscription, or the collection period is adjusted based on CPU. All right. On the next slide, we're thinking, well, we should be using telemetry to send information. Well, that makes sense because it's information about telemetry, and that should follow with telemetry. And we could be using the onChange so that we would make sure that if some information about the context changes, then we would reliably receive it and directly receive it. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Let me just say on this one that we explain the draft how to map the data to the data manifest. Let's skip that one and go to the next one. So we identified a couple of improvements, right? And that's where, if you want, go to the mic at the end and discuss this. Well, one of them was about the source of data and the self-assertiveness. How do I know that actually, if you are a VNF or router, well, can I trust you, right? And there's also the issue of data integrity. What if someone would change this information? Now, what we need to do here is actually analyze the threat model, right? Which is basically management traffic inside your domain. But we have any way to do it, right? Personally, I always believe pragmatically that if someone is changing just the source of data, and is able to attack you on that front, maybe you have bigger problem than just changing the context information. But we'll have to pass security ADs at some point in time. So let's analyze the threat model. Open questions. Well, we could do that for other types of information. The context, right, for SNMP. For IPFix, well, IPFix, if you do sampling, you want to know you're doing sampling. It's the same context information, same type. What about virtual devices? What about VNFs, right? Do we want to mention if there's miscollections? That's also something pretty interesting to understand from a data collection point of view. And what about the Yang packages, which is a topic in the ops area that could potentially be included? And I believe this is, no, maybe one more slide. Yeah. So the conclusion, we got a couple of good feedback, Matt, Terry, and Ignacio. And I would like to understand from this working group, if you recognize the issue, and if you believe that we should work on this. From an author point of view, from different horizon, we clearly believe this is a problem to be solved, because we want to solve the issue of autonomous networks, for which we must have closed loop, for which we must have anomaly detection. Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, Rob as a participant. Thanks, Benoit. I think to recognize the problem statement, absolutely. I definitely think this is a very interesting problem. I think it's a very hard one to solve. And I think one of the key questions, it looks like you are returning the metadata per subscription. Is that correct? Which I understand why you're doing that, because otherwise it's going to be too much data. But I wonder actually whether to really solve this, you almost need the metadata per leaf field that's being pushed off the box. Because if, for example, you've got a subscription and interface goes away and it stops returning data for that interface, I'm not sure whether you would spot that. But if you do it per leaf node, then you end up with too much data. So I think it's an interesting problem to solve. I don't know what the solution is. So I think it's good to work on it, but I think it's tricky.
It's tricky. There was in an MRG like a comment about digital twin, right? And the gentleman there mentioned that somehow we start to be in the world of data, oh, forget it now, data-driven AI, which is actually trying to find out, because all data scientists, they want to have all the data, right? We have to be slightly pragmatic specifically whenever we speak as operators. So this is trying to find out how much data do we need at the minimum to be able to solve the problem. Ideally, everything per node all the time, every single flow, data plane. In practice, there is like middle ground. So I agree with your statement. And with the subscription ID, we could find out which nodes are in there and that's a compromise.
But in terms of wanting to know both when a value was actually written and how fresh it is, those two properties I think are important. So I think it's an interesting problem.
Sorry. So hi, this is Hank again, with no heads on. So this manifest, how I understand it, is combining quite a few of different types of information. So it's all from the subscription side. So subscription also deals with the same problem. At the beginning, you tell everything, whatever you subscribe to, you don't know what the receiver knows. So you get a full iframe, so to speak. And that's the same with metadata. You would give the full metadata once, but that can be slimmed down later. And then outside of the subscription context, there's integrity I heard. And when I hear integrity, sometimes I always think remote attestation and trustworthiness. So I might have some future comments on that, because I think that's also metadata that will change, because especially if the identity of the composite system changes due to vital elements changing, and then for its expressiveness and trustworthiness changes, although the data and the leaves will remain the same. So I think, yes, it sounds to me like an interesting problem.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Diego, we're gonna have to cut it off. Okay.
No, it's just say that. Well,
Diego Lopez.
Diego Lopez. Yes, thank you. No, it's precisely this. We are right now very much involved in projects that are related to this, to not the data, the metadata, because we are right now, when you analyze how the network is behaving, we are feeling the deluge, and we need. And this kind of initiative is something that is of extreme interest to us. Just to as a note.
Thank you. Thanks, Min Shui.
Me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. That's great. Okay. Thank you. So I'm Min-Shui Wang from China Mobile. So I will present this work, in-band flow learning framework. So on behalf of Liu Yan and Fan, the co-authors. So, okay, next slide, please. So the network telemetry provides network visibility and to the state and behavior of network. So it is crucial to network operations and load supervisions. So from our operator's perspective, it is important to monitor the live traffic, including the delay and packet loss. And previously, we have presented the problem statement of the in-band flow telemetry deployment on the last IETF meeting. Just mention that we really have a large scale of 5G backhaul networks, like 400,000 network nodes, and already have 100,000 base stations. So this issue is really important issue in our large scale network. And in this draft, we are going to propose a framework of the in-band and flow-based information learning mechanism to try to solve the problems in our deployment of the telemetry. Okay, next, please. Also, first, the framework of the in-band flow learning includes 3 components of service discovery and telemetry deployment and the telemetry adjustment. So for each component, there's main functions. Like in service discovery, the main function is to do flow characteristic acquisitions. And in telemetry deployment, the main functions are to figure the telemetry type, policy, and instance. And for the adjustments, the most important function is for aging. So there are still methods to do those functions. So the differences between the methods we listed here are mainly controller, trigger, or deploy, or the device deploy or trigger, and sometimes they work together to complete a function. So okay, next, please. And here for the service discovery, we consider it's a process of sampling to the service flow, which is being transmitted in the network. And in order to further determine which flow should be monitored, and depends on the characteristic of the service flow, like IP source address, IP destination address, TCP UDP port numbers, VRF interface network nodes, and also can be MAC address or the combinations of these characteristics. And to target the service discovery is to obtain these flow characteristics from the traffic. And it can be configuration triggers. You can base on a database of a planned service flow information, which is stored on the central controller, and we can obtain it from the network operations. So such as a table of services between the base station and core network equipment in our 5G backhaul scenario. And we also can do device triggers like live traffic sampling, and to relies on the capability of forwarding plane of a network node. Okay, next, please. The telemetry deployment functions are type, policy, and deployment. So first type we should consider is end-to-end type or hop-by-hop type. For end-to-end, you can just got the report from the endpoint and egress node. And for hop-by-hop, each node on the path should report the performance monitoring. Yeah. And for the telemetry policy is to determine which flow should be monitored. It can be a lot of strategies and policies. I just put an example like we do in the base station, or we mainly based on IP and port. Yeah. And for the deployment, it can be deployed by the controller, or it can be deployed by the device itself. So, okay, next, please. And for adjustment, there's two scenarios. First is a route convergency. So when the service flow switch to the other forwarding nodes, like in some protection or route convergency scenario, to monitor the same flow information, a new telemetry instance is required to add on the new transit or egress node, depending on the service telemetry type. Yeah. And for aging, so regarding IFET or in-band performance monitoring, running on the fault path, or there is no flow that meets the policy during a period. So the aging of the IFET or in-band performance monitoring should be supported in order to recycle the network resources. And the instance should be deleted once it becomes stale. So it can be controlled by the central controller, or the network can do it itself. Oh, okay, I think we can. So for the next step, we will update the draft according to the feedbacks, and we are warmly welcome and comments or contributions to this work. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Elliot. Elliot.
Good evening. Thank you for your draft. I have to say, in your presentation, it was just a little too high level for me. That is to say, what are the triggers? What do these triggers look like? What functions are intended to be triggered? I guess the next step might be for everybody to go read the draft, or at least for me to. But what I'm looking for, I'll tell you what I'm looking for, will be a little bit more meat in terms of the technical steps that would lead to interoperability. Thank you.
Okay, I see. I will write it down, and I will do to specify the methods and the functions with the clauses. Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Charles Eckel, and I have to confess I haven't read the draft yet, but I appreciated your presentation. And one thing I was wondering is, do you envision some of these flows just being configured, like where the application or an operator or someone knows certain traffic is expected to be on their network? They might actually want to just configure or let you know about ones that exist. And could that happen in parallel to learning the flows as well?
Question is that so we can configure the flow learning, and at the same time the customers can can start flow learning themselves. Is that question?
Yeah, I guess so. I was wondering.
Yeah.
Explicit configuration rather than kind of autonomous learning.
Oh yeah. That's a good vision, I think. I never thought about that before, because for the 5G backhaul, it's more like the operators' privacy networks, and it's not open to the real customers now. It's just connecting the base stations and our core networks. Yeah, and maybe if it is in the near future, if there is some enterprise customers connecting in our networks, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Rob, make it quick. You're cutting into your time now.
Fine. Okay, so just wanted to basically so thank you for bringing this work to the IETF. And I haven't read the draft one, or only skimmed it. I think my one question or concern I have is this work looks like it might overlap quite heavily with the IPPM working group, and I definitely think it would be useful for you to present there and get their feedback on this, because I'm not sure we should do much with it in Opsawg if IPPM aren't supportive. And so I think I'd like to understand exactly what the scope is of here and how that relates to the IPPM working group, if that makes sense.
This question. So we have proposed the problem statement in both IPPM and OPS AWG, and we think so this work is not so technical to how to do the performance monitoring, but more related to how to manage or how to deploy the large-scale network to support the performance monitoring. So, so last in the 112 IETF meeting, we discussed with Drill, and so we think it is can be done here. This work.
Okay, if we do that, I think I need to shout the chairs, but I think this would need very careful coordination.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Tree. Xiaoming.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hello. Okay. Let me present this draft problem statement and the use cases of adaptive traffic data collection. Next slide, please. Motivation. First, IP carrier network need to provide real-time traffic visibility to help network operate quickly and accurately look at the network congestion and packet loss. Make timely path adjustment for deterministic services to avoid congestion. On the other hand, persistent sampling at millisecond intervals will generate considerable amount of data, which may claim too much transport and waste resource. Overload the service for data collection, storage, and analysis. Our objective is to explore the adaptive traffic data collection mechanism so as to capture real-time network state at minimal resource consumption. Next slide, please. Yes. Problem statement. IP network is of traffic-based characteristic, but the runtime operates heavy obtaining the traffic visibility for network management system, which cannot reflect this kind of baseline characteristics. First, the observed average network traffic masks the characteristics of traffic best, given that SNT is widely employed to collect network traffic at 5 minutes intervals. Second, in spite of low link usage, such as 13 to 14% average bandwidth utilization, many claims have still been received about poor query in delivery applications with the sensitivity of this delay and loss. Large quantity of operational data indicate that macro-based phenomena occurs frequently in operates carrier networks, such as IP RAN, IP pantry, metropolitan network, IP backbone network, and in the data center. By means of telemetry techniques, we can capture the complete aspects of macro-based traffic. However, it is practice to give the real-time traffic visibility at the cost of persistent sampling at milliseconds intervals. Next slide, please. Please. The scenarios of adaptive traffic data connections. Mark mentioned their real-time portrait of interface traffic characteristics. Obtaining the holistic and genuine characteristic of interface traffic is a basic requirement for this statistic multiplex model of IP network, which is of great significance for traffic prediction, network planning, network capacity expansion, and network optimization, and so on. And the normal long congested network conditions, which happens at the time of 55% above, minutes level sampling cycle is enough, but where detecting a congestion state or trend, sampling cycle must be tuned to milliseconds to capture a macro-based of interface. So it is essential to explore the adaptive traffic data collection techniques to depict multi-dimensional real-time portrait of interface traffic characteristic at minimal resource consumptions. Next slide, please. Next steps, we will select comments and find the draft accordingly. Possible implementation and verification. That's what. Thank you.
Elliot?
Hi, Xiaoming. Thanks very much for your presentation. 2 comments. The first is, you may be able to do a fair amount. You may be able to get a fair amount of information if you're interested in particular thresholding activities by using the event MIB, which is already defined in the IETF. So you might want to take a look at that. The second point I want to make is that there was an excellent presentation earlier in the week at the IRTF open meeting about A/B comparisons for research, which looks at monitoring methodologies, and it might bear on how you want to look at this problem as well.
Okay. Sorry, I don't understand what your question.
Okay, I'll try again. My apologies. There exists a MIB, management information base, called the event MIB. And the event MIB, this is event as in an event happens. It allows for threshold configuration so that when, say, a certain rate-based counter exceeds something, or a queue depth exceeds something, you might decide to do additional reporting through that event MIB. This already exists in the IETF and may help you. I don't know if it solves completely your problem statement, but it may help you address at least part of your problem statement. The second point I was making is that there was an Applied Network Research Award presentation that talked about A/B comparisons for traffic treatment, done by a woman who was at least doing some work with Netflix. And I thought it was a very useful way to avoid biasing of results, something you also may wish to just have a gander at, a look at, excuse me. Thank you.
Okay. We are looking into that. But my listening ability is very poor. Please please send your comments and the question to me by email. Thank you.
Yeah, Elliot, if you could summarize that on the list, that would be fantastic. Thanks. And thanks, Xiaoming, for presenting. We have our last presentation. If I can find it, I think it's this one. Anon, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, okay. So, hello everyone. We have our co-author Martha also on the call. So this presentation is about a Yang model for data export over IPFix. Next slide, please. So we have an existing model. First of all, we are looking at IPFix as the one of the options for bulk data export and one of the main options. So mainly in the broadband access nodes, where there is a great need to export a lot of data to a centralized location. And there is also one more application where there is a need for exchanging data internally within the node. So that is the ICTP case, where data for two channel terminations are exchanged between the two NG point boards or within the same board. So that is one more application. Next slide, please. We have an existing Yang model which was written by Benba, but it was in the early days of NetConf Yang, and meanwhile NetConf Yang has evolved a lot, and even the application of IPFix has also evolved from just packet sampling towards bulk data export. So we see quite a lot of limitations there where it is closely related to packet sampling, closely tied to packet sampling, and there is a mandatory requirement to support SCTP, but SCTP is not used widely, and we don't see hope. I mean, or see a adoption in the future too, a wide adoption in the future too. Apart from that, we also had, have some outdated references to interfaces and statements which, leaves which are not no longer valid in the NetConf world. Next slide, please. So, okay, we already had 3 revisions of the previous draft. So the draft underwent a name change because of the change in authors. So the previous draft, which we did, had envisioned a replacement for the existing 6728 model. So we had tried to update all the entire YANG that was there in 6728, split them into 3 different models for the ease of use in the deployment. So IETF IPFix had exporter and collector, PSAMP had the PSAMP specific functions, and bulk data export focused on the cache and the bulk data export related parameters. So, and we also made SCTP as optional instead of mandatory to allow for deployments that use TCP mainly with TLS, and also updated the referencing to reflect the current reference interface references and addresses. So, okay, next slide, please. So we received a lot of comments on the model. One of the main comment being that it is too long and it is covering a lot of things that need quite an extensive review. So based on the comments, we have revised the model. So the new draft name on the new draft model is an updated version where we have removed the PSAMP and the collecting process, and we have tried to focus only on the bulk data export part of it. So which has the IPFix exporting process and IPFix exporting process and the bulk data export part of it. So this is a shorter version of it. Plus, we have stuck to only TCP as a transport protocol and removed the file operations and the file and the SCTP and UDP. So which UDP is not secure enough. So we have stuck to TCP here. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's rather a small display of the YANG tree. So basically, we have the IPFix exporting process on the top, and the bulk data export, which is a configuration of the template IPFix template at the bottom. Next slide, please. So okay, we understand that this needs to be an AD document, but after the comments were addressed and we called for an adoption in the mailing list, but we have not received any feedback on that yet. So we would like to know the comments and if there are any challenges in moving towards WG adoption for this draft. I think the next slide also summarizes the same. Maybe one more point to add is that there is an open liaison request from BBF, and the link to that is shared here. So BBF is actively looking towards this draft getting adopted as an RFC. Yeah. Any questions, comments?
We have a couple minutes for comments. I tried to run a poll, but it wasn't asynchronous. I was trying to see who had potentially read this new version. Of the people who were able to respond, 5 out of the 13, out of the 18 participants said they had. So that doesn't leave a lot of people who maybe read it. Rob?
Yes, so thank you for persevering, because I know this has been quite a long and quite hard process for you to try and get this work progressing. So as I understand it, before I was an AD, the previous Ops Management AD agreed to AD sponsor it, but it hadn't progressed at that time, and there was concern raised that the previous version of this was trying to obsolete the previous standards track RFC, and that was felt that was inappropriate to do that through AD sponsored. I personally, I mean, I don't have that much experience with IPFix myself, and I'm keen to try and get these things through the working group as much as possible. I'm really pleased that you've cut down the size of the draft. I think the previous one was 150 pages down to 50 pages, which is mostly just Yang now, with a little bit more. So I would please ask the working group if they can help give this attention and try and get this one through, because I think it's important that we actually help the BBF who are trying to do the right thing here. And I would rather try and get it through the working group and get more eyes on it and get a good document than go via the AD sponsor path, which I don't think we get quite a good result. So thank you for bringing this here.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Sorry, real quick, and I think given as chair, I think given the restructuring, we could do another call and see if there is renewed interest in picking up this work.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we are no longer obsoleting RFC 6728. So it's an entirely new draft that we are proposing now.
Elliot, and sorry if we're difficult to hear. I'm trying to get into the mic as best I can.
Hey, yeah, you are a little faint, Joe. I don't know what's going on, but my suggestion here to the working group, I like the idea of the call for adoption. I would delay it by a month, and then maybe the chairs can harass us a little bit on Ops Area Working Group to make sure that we're reading, because it does sound like anytime we see something that you know, there's clearly some value in the concept. If BBF is asking for it, that's even more important. And, you know, to at least pay a little attention to it. And, you know, I think, though, that the small number of people who read it, as indicated on the poll, is a little bit concerning. So just a little harassment from the chairs and giving a little extra time to read it could allow us to get a better read on whether it's ready for adoption.
Thanks,
Yeah, you can bet anytime, Joe.
With that, Tianren or Hank, anything to add?
So we had some documents in the early agenda stage that could be in a candidate state for last call, at least for review. I think they were MUD related, I guess, and so they didn't come up today. We will take care of that. We press some review buttons here. We will confer with the editors and then go from there.
Thanks. And with that, Rob and Warren, would you like to take us home? I gave them more than 10 minutes. I win. How tall do you think I am anyway?
Heightism.
Heightism, yeah.
Well, this is for the first time I've formally been standing in front of you as an AD, which is sort of quite nice, and the first time I've been able to chair. So I think it's really, if you've got any questions for us, it'd be lovely to hear them. Normally when we ask this sort of question, we get no response. Even in the plenary yesterday, there was no questions to the ISG, so probably it's an opportunity to have no questions here, but we would invite them. We'd also invite any feedback and comments back to Warren and I. That's also something that we actively like and look for. And the last point from my side is that if there's folks that are interested in stepping up and helping, doing like doc shepherding, or are interested in like working group chair roles, that sort of thing, then do email Warren and I and contact us, and we'll see what we can do to help facilitate that sort of path in the IETF.
And my turn. So as you all probably know, I've been doing this AD thing for a while now, and I am still enjoying it, and it's still fun. But at the end of this year / March of next year, I could have finished my third term. And I think it would be good if there were other candidates for the NomCom to choose between and for the community to select from. So I don't yet know whether I'll toss my hat in the ring again. It's a nice hat though, you must admit. But I would like to chat with some people about what it's like being an AD, how much time it takes, the fun bits, the not so fun bits. So if you think that you might be willing to run for Ops AD, please let me know. And I think it's always good for there to be some new blood and changeover. So, this is sort of a plea for people to step up and be willing to serve. It is fun. You do have to work with Rob, but other than that, it's fun. Crap, he's right behind me. Oh. No, it's a fun job. One of the nice things is you're expected to read all of the new drafts. And so, yep, we all know how that goes. But, if you're forced to read them, you actually end up learning a bunch of interesting things. You're like, wow, I would never have read that if I wasn't forced to. And it's actually, it really is one of the better parts of it. Maybe not at the time, but it's a reasonable time investment. But the first year is fairly unpleasant while you're trying to figure out what you actually have to pay attention to. After that, it becomes a lot easier when you're like, this I don't care about, this I don't care about, that I'm gonna work on. You sort of build up a structure and a system. And yeah, once again, please consider doing this. It doesn't have to be a full-time job. If you let it become one, it definitely will. But it really doesn't have to be. And please come and chat with me, chat with Rob, etc. And open mic, there must be at least some set of questions. You can't possibly think that we're doing an awesome job all the time, can you?
Alan, the mic.
El Morton.
Okay, hi. I was trying to turn on my video here, but I think I did the wrong thing. All right, here we go. There we go. Hi. Hi. So, here's the question, and it's one that folks who have been following the Opster mailing list probably have some inkling about. I was Stucky reviewing the quick manageability draft. And in that draft, I happened to find that there were statements where essentially the authors, and then ultimately we found out that it was a strong working group consensus that they wanted to at least recommend network admission settings where we, as operators, network operators, where we would not look at the version number and consider that as part of admission control. And that struck me as maybe out of bounds for a draft to specify or a future RFC to specify, because admission control is enforcement of policy. And I don't, as an operator, want any RFC to specify policy. So I'm wondering if other operators agree, and if the ops area in general agrees. And it's going to take that kind of consensus, I believe, to do something about this, because in my comments back, what I've heard, from the authors who are, I consider both friends of mine, and other folks from the working group who are friends, that this is working group consensus and we can't do anything about it. So it's ultimately going to come to a head somewhere. I'm not getting much satisfaction with that particular point, but that's the one I wanted to raise here today. Thank you.
So, Elliot, is your comment on this?
It's a clarifying question. So, hey, how you doing, Al? my clarifying question is that in the text because the information might be unreliable, or is it in the text? Why is the recommendation made? Because it may be that they're saying this is something that operators should not rely on for policy because it could be completely bogus or whatever the case may be. What was their logic?
Well, I've heard lots of feedback on that. Some of it is that the version numbers will change fast, that there will be additional work on this and a new version fairly soon. And the underlying sentiment that seems to come through is, treating operators like they were back in 1998, where there was, very infrequent changes of network policy, and they like to relegate operators to, the fact that their only role is ossification. And I think that's it's a very much a convenient view for the particular working group to take, but I would contend that it's very much a view from the past. Thank you.
So I mean, this is Warren. I mean, it is somewhat of a difficult question because I think some of it is also the belief that seeing as you can't really tell what's in the stream, you're potentially blocking or doing admission control on something which is somewhat arbitrary, right? Like whether it's version X or version Y, you still don't really know what's in the rest of it. And so what are you making this decision on? And then there's also the sort of, what if we try and deploy this and realize that we get stuck because somebody has done admission control in this and now we can't deploy a new version. So I don't actually know what the right answer is. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to raise it as a concern. And after a few back and forths, you could always just throw your hands up and be like, well, this is what I, as an operator and other operators think, and let us know. And, Rob and I can try and do something like put a discuss on it or something. Right? If they end up in the position where you do ops review, it's incredibly helpful if you try and push the position and get to consensus. But if you can't, let us know and we can try and do this is what the operators are saying, and it's a valid concern, and it needs to be addressed. We'd prefer not to be left kind of holding the bag, but that's kind of what we're here for. And I prefer if Rob does it, because after all, Opsawg is his side.
One follow-up to that quickly, Warren. I'm raising it here, that the question and the topic, because I mean, right now it's my opinion as an operator. I'm trying to find out as you said, are there more operators that share this opinion? And we have some time to figure that out. And then the other side of this is I think it's a perfectly reasonable policy for operators to decide on that they admit traffic with version numbers that has a published RFC. And then I don't, and then if I want to see what's inside, I can do active testing. I don't have to do, I mean, the other point of view that was inherent in this draft as it moved forward, but was an implicit part of the scope, and we've discovered this in the comments, is that they really felt all that operators would do would be the passive on-the-wire monitoring. And that's no longer true, and it's particularly untrue in this case. I mean, we've been challenged to find new methods to manage our traffic, and one of those methods is apparently you're going to have to be setting up our own endpoints and terminating the traffic ourselves and trying to figure out what's wrong with it. This is all under the assumption that the operator wants to support quick. And that seems to be anathema to this working group as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've identified sort of one of the key bits here, which is there's definitely a tension between some of the views in certain working groups like Quick and some of the views of operators. Like there's a tension of a belief that operators are out to be difficult and no information should ever be exposed to them ever because they will just do bad things, versus the operator view of like, well, if you want to pass the traffic over my network, I kind of need to know what it is so I can protect my network from it. And that was somewhat discussed in Kathleen's Effect Encrypt and a few other ones. And it's definitely, the tension is definitely stronger in certain groups and areas than others. But yeah, I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable for operators to want to be able to enforce policy on whatever they like. I guess one thing that I'll note is even if the RFC says, you can't do this, if your box has the knob, your box has the knob. This sounds very much like the nuclear option of like, I don't really care what your RFC says, I'm going to do X, which definitely doesn't help repair any of the tension. But yeah, like I'd like to know what other operators think on this topic if they've been following the discussion, etc. And I think I stepped in front of Rob.
Yes, I was just going to comment from a slightly different perspective. I think that one thing's important, they're saying that this has working group consensus on this decision, but the documents that we publish have to have IETF consensus. So I don't think that that alone is sufficient to say you can't discuss this, it's already been decided. That's definitely not in scope. And as Warren says, we will help support you in that. That the side of it that the Ops DIR reviews are really important from us because you help offload a bit of the work from Warren and I. We've had an Ops DIR review. It means that we don't have to necessarily spend quite so much time reviewing those documents. And when we have 400 pages of documents to review, along with everything else, that's really helpful. So all the Ops DR reviews are great and really helpful. On this particular point, I think the other thing that might be worth pushing back on is saying, can this be expressed in a different way? So rather than saying you should not do this shouldn't do this filtering, say these are the problems that can arise if you do this filtering. And then so it's not enforcing a policy, it's just saying consider this when you're applying this. That might be a sort of compromise way that gets the message across without putting any rules in place.
Yeah, I tried some alternate text and it was rejected. I don't, the answer was I don't want to change the consensus text. There you go.
Sorry, and just one quick note. I mean, yes, as Rob said, Opster is really helpful. If you run into issues like this, it's also extra helpful to just drop Rob and I a note so that we know to be paying attention earlier and more attention and not just sort of look at the Opster thing and be like, well, there was some discussion and it got resolved. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry, man, but I think I already did that.
Well, just a couple of things. Hello, this is Diego.
Hi, Diego.
Good to see that you have a so well decorated wall behind you. It's amazing.
Yeah, it gets them out of my drawers.
Well, no, just you were asking for the opinion of more operators, and for us, it's a concern, and it's a concern, and we have been talking about this quite often. Precisely, probably, I remember some time ago there was in the transport group there was a draft that was promoted by Gorry Farnhurst from the University of Edinburgh, that he was very much involved in this, precisely about the operational implications of the use of transport pervasive encryption and all the like. And my impression is precisely they don't fly as they should, but probably this group is one that is very adequate to raise these concerns, because we're talking about operations. We're not talking about anything else. We're not questioning at all the right of everyone to have a privacy in their communications, whatever. It's about, well, but we want to run properly the damn networks. And this is something again that I had tried to raise this when in some conversations with people from ISOC, is about the implication this would have in the sustainability, in the economic sustainability of the internet ecosystem. Not when talking about sustainability, I'm not talking about green things or whatever, that is important as well, but it's about that there is a group of different entities that have been making money and earning a decent life from operating the internet, if we push in a single direction, this would make the internet unsustainable in the current terms. And for example, the basic network service would become, I mean, the only way if we go in that direction, it would become a state monopoly. And I think that very few people would like to see this happening here and in many other places at least in the Western world. I know it's a fully political opinion, I know, but things have consequences and we have to learn to live with that.
So 5 minutes over, closing remarks.
My only closing remark is thank you for the work you do.
Yep, and extra thanks to Opsawg, and extra thanks to anybody who's willing to, consider running as AD.
Have a great evening, everyone.
This concludes Opsawg again. Bye-bye, WG, of course. So German. Yeah. The Germans. Oh, I don't know, yes. So I literally tripped over a chair.